Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The streets were lined with century-old oaks, their twisted branches forming natural arches over the red brick walkways. At every corner, American flags fluttered gently in the southern breeze. And there, in an upscale neighborhood where the silence had the elegance of an ancient secret, stood the Montgomery House. A large white colonnaded mansion, an architectural relic of the Old South, covered in purple wisteria that cascaded from the porch. The lawn, trimmed to the millimeter by a team of invisible gardeners, smelled of fresh mint and cut hay. The interior was equally well kept. Polished parquet floors, oriental rugs, family portraits in gilt frames, thick drapes matching the sofas. Everything exuded stability, restraint, success. Les Montgomery lived there for 3 generations. There was Karen, 42, executive of a high-end communications firm in Atlanta. Beautiful, strict, elegant, always dressed to the nines. The kind of woman whose smile never reaches her eyes. She held her image as one holds a crystal glass, carefully and firmly. Her husband, David, was a real estate lawyer. Tall, polite, absent. He traveled often on business, and when he came home, he spent more time answering emails than talking to his son. And then there was Elliot, their only child. 6 years old. Curious, sensitive, always searching for something without knowing what. He had very light blue eyes, almost translucent, like David's. But sometimes, when he laughed, there was a warmth in his features that came from neither of them. But it wasn't Karen who woke him up in the morning, nor David who made him recite his ABCs. They weren't the ones who knew that he liked his milk warm, not hot, that he was afraid of the dark unless there was a moon-shaped night light, or that he cried when he heard sad music, even if he didn't understand the words. It was Grace Anderson, a 38-year-old black woman. She had her hair pulled back in a neat bun, a soft, deep voice, and her hands were always busy, buttoning a coat, stroking a cheek, preparing a meal. Her clothes were simple, always in neutral tones, beiges, browns, navy, as if to never overshadow the house she inhabited without actually inhabiting. They called her the nanny, but she wasn't like other domestic workers. She had a quiet authority, a presence, a way of looking at Elliot like a forgotten treasure. Every morning, she would get up well before the family and prepare blueberry pancakes that Elliot loved, with a touch of vanilla like his own mother used to make. She would add a smile drawn with maple syrup on the plate, and always wait for him to notice the shape before laughing together. Every night she sat beside his bed, on a wooden chair she called Mother Owl's Perch, and sang him an old gospel lullaby, passed down through the generations of his family. It was a song his grandmother used to sing to him when they lived in Macon, in a small wooden house with blue shutters. A sweet song that said, "You were born of love, you are kept by love, and you will return to love." No one in the neighborhood questioned it. A black woman raising the son of a wealthy white family? It wasn't unusual. Neighbors smiled politely and said hello, but never asked her opinion on local politics. She was part of the scenery, like the wisteria or the wooden porch. More Elliot, his, smelled something. There was an invisible thread between him and Grace. A thread woven from knowing glances, comforting silences, gestures full of instinctive love. When he fell off his bike, he didn't shout "Mom" toward the house. He shouted Grace, and she ran. One autumn evening, as the rain hammered against the windows, he asked the question with an innocence that pierced Grace's heart. "Why doesn't she want me to call you Mom?" he asked, his eyes shining with sincerity. Grace remained silent for a moment. The ticking of the old clock in the hallway punctuated her hesitation. Then she lowered her eyes, slowly, as if carrying an invisible burden. "Because she's your mom, Elliot. I'm just here for you." But in her eyes that night, there was a different glow. A contained, almost painful light. A secret ready to overflow. And Elliot, though too young to understand the words, felt in his gut the gravity of what she wasn't saying. 7 years earlier, Grace Anderson was 31 years old, with the future ahead of her. She had just graduated with a master's degree in African American literature at Howard University, with a notable thesis on Toni Morrison and intergenerational memory. She taught at a small high school in Atlanta, leading writing workshops for troubled teenagers. She was a luminous, fiery woman, committed and gentle at the same time. She had also just fallen in love. Marcus Hale was everything Grace had never dared to hope for. A charismatic activist, a Morehouse alumnus, a community organizer, a defender of civil rights in the city's poor neighborhoods. Their love had been dazzling. Two souls driven by the same dreams of justice. Two hearts beating as one for a better world. When she told him she was pregnant, Marcus hugged her with feverish tenderness. "This baby will be our greatest revolution," he murmured. But a few weeks later, everything changed. One July evening, during a peaceful demonstration against police violence, an altercation broke out. In the crush, a police officer fell, injured in the head. Marcus, who tried to calm things down, was accused of being the culprit. He was arrested on the spot, despite testimonies exonerating him and the truncated videos circulating. The trial was a farce. The judge, known for his conservative leanings, rejected several exculpatory pieces of evidence. Marcus was sentenced to 12 years in prison for aggravated assault on a law enforcement officer. For Grace, the world collapsed. Shortly after the conviction, her teaching contract was not renewed. She was told, embarrassedly, that her name was circulating a little too much in the wrong circles. Colleagues who admired her greeted her from afar in the corridors. Her savings dwindled. She was evicted from her apartment, and no one wanted to rent her a new place with this liability and a baby on the way. As 6 months pregnant, exhausted, and anemic, she collapsed in a queue at a free medical center in the city center. She was admitted as an emergency. Complications related to hypertension and malnutrition. She spent 3 days on an 4 drip, alone, with no news of Marcus, with no one to call. It was in this waiting room, with its dim lighting, between 2 early contractions and a chilling fear, that she met Karen Montgomery. Dressed in a cream-colored suit, her heels clicking discreetly on the tiles, Karen looked out of place in this modest center. She held a medical chart in her hand, but her face betrayed a sadness that was hard to conceal. Seeing Grace, hunched over, her hands trembling, she cautiously approached. She handed her a bottle of water. "You look exhausted. Are you alone?" It was the beginning of a long conversation, filled with silences heavier than words. Karen herself had just lost a child. A miscarriage at 5 months. Her empty stomach still screamed her absence. She spoke little, but her gaze searched Grace's with an almost painful intensity. When she learned that Grace no longer had any family, her mother had died of cancer, her father had disappeared since childhood, her friends had moved away or fled, she placed a hand on his. "This baby, you could entrust him to me. You would stay with him. As a wet nurse. He would live in a comfortable home. He would never want for anything." Grace, on an 4 drip, in a hospital gown, had nothing left. Not even a roof over her head. Her stomach tightened with fatigue and fear. She looked at Karen, this woman who seemed to have everything she had lost, and she saw there, in her clear eyes, a flaw. A silent wound. A cold, almost clinical desire to repair an absence with a presence. "Would he know I'm his mother?" she asked, almost under her breath. Karen avoided the question. "You'll be there every day? You'll see him grow. It will be our secret. He'll be loved, protected." Grace agreed. She had no lawyer, no strength, no options. The next day, she signed a simple paper with no real legal value, but which served to frame their arrangement. Karen took care of the rest. She staged a fake birth, changed some records, and had Elliot Montgomery listed as biological son of Karen and David. And so, a few weeks later, Grace entered the Montgomery household, not as the mother of a child, but as their nanny. But from the first day, she felt the cage invisiblito close herself off. She couldn't say "my son," nor hold him in her arms in front of the guests. She had to stand back, modest, grateful. Every maternal gesture became a risk. Every public tenderness was a reminder. It's not your role. It's not your name that's written on his birth certificate. She had accepted this pact out of love. But this pact had slowly begun to devour her. A day of celebration. The April sun bathed the Montgomery family's large white house in golden light, streaming through the huge windows of the living room where an elegant crowd had gathered to celebrate Elliot's 6th birthday. Bouquets of fresh flowers adorned every corner. Pastel balloons floated from the ceiling, and jazzy music wafted through the warm air. In the garden, adults discussed business, local politics, or the latest baseball game. Children ran around the fountain, their laughter mingling with the sounds of shouting. At the center of the main room, Elliot was the undisputed star. His face lit up with every gift unwrapped, every surprise revealed. He laughed out loud, jumped, skipped, and did the joyful little dances that only innocence can invent. Everything seemed perfect. Then came that suspended moment, the one when everyone's eyes turned towards him. Elliot, standing in the middle of the living room, with the spontaneity of a child, turned towards Grace. In a clear and tender voice, he said, almost as if it were obvious, "Thank you, Mom." Time seemed to stand still. A shudder ran through the room. Glasses raised to their lips froze, suspended in midair, as if stopped by some invisible force. Conversations died down, eyes met, searching for the source of this unexpected word. Karen, standing by the buffet, felt her heart sink. Her skin paled, and one hand trembled slightly as she held a glass of champagne. Her smile faded, replaced by an icy expression. In a dry, authoritarian tone, she approached Elliot. "Elliot, don't say that. You know perfectly well I'm your mom." But the child didn't back down. His clear gaze fixed Karen with disconcerting maturity. "No, it's her. She knows me better than anyone. She loves me." A heavy silence fell. Murmurs began, in low voices, almost curious and embarrassed whispers. Some guests exchanged furtive glances, embarrassed by this disturbing scene that had shattered the perfect image of the Montgomery family. Karen, her jaw set, her breathing rapid, spoke in an icy voice to Grace. "Grace, come out." Now, Grace, though her face impassive, felt a knot of emotion knotting in her chest. She mustered all her dignity, slowly placed her hand on Elliot's shoulder, and walked away without a word. Behind her, the whispers intensified, some casting looks of pity, others of judgment. In the heavy silence, Karen regained control of the party, but her smile was now frozen, marked by the dull fear of this secret about to explode. Elliot, for his part, stood there, a little perplexed, as if he had simply spoken the simplest truth in the world. The next morning, in the Montgomery house, the sun barely filtered through the thick curtains of the bedroom where Grace sat silently. Her suitcase lay ajar on the bed, half filled with neatly folded clothes. Every movement was measured, almost ritualized, as if preparing for her departure helped her tame a pain she still refused to acknowledge. Her gaze, lost in space, lingered on a framed photo on the dresser, an image of Elliot smiling, tenderly holding her hand. A memory of a fragile happiness, eclipsed by the unspoken. A sudden noise pulled her from her torpor. The doorbell, clear and insistent, breaking the immutable silence of the house. Grace stood frozen for a moment, her heart beating faster. She gently put down Elliot's sweater, which she was holding, and, as if driven by a force she didn't understand, slowly stood up. At the door when she opened it, she discovered a man with a tired but firm appearance. His face was marked by life, the marks of long, sleepless nights, miles traveled, and battles fought. His wrinkled shirt bore witness to a difficult journey, a hasty return. Yet in his eyes, there was a clarity, a determination that left no room for doubt. "Hello, Grace. My name is Darius Hale. I'm Marcus's brother." The man's voice, deep and calm, had that quiet strength that commands respect. Grace felt a wave of conflicting emotions wash over her. Fear, hope, anger, and a strange kind of relief. Darius took a thick file out of his bag and placed it delicately on the small table in the hall. "I know what you did. Marcus told me everything from his cell. That child is the son of our family." He then took out a sealed envelope and handed it to Grace respectfully. "This is the DNA test, without any ambiguity." Grace, her hands trembling slightly, tore the seal. Her eyes scanned the document that finally sealed the truth she had carried within her for so long. "And this file is to begin the legal procedure." She felt a lump rise in her throat, a mixture of hope and apprehension. A few hours later, in the vast, immaculate living room, Karen Montgomery looked at Darius coldly, trying in vain to mask the fear and anger boiling inside her. "How much do you want to make this story stop?" Karen snapped, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and panic. She handed over a check, a substantial amount, hoping to buy their silence and protect her image, her family, her secret. But Darius shook his head, his eyes full of defiance. This isn't about money. We're here for grace. For justice. It's time she took back what she should never have lost. Karen clenched her fists, her jaw clenched. The inevitable battle had begun. As soon as the proceedings were announced, the local press seized on the case, fascinated by this unusual story. A black nanny claims maternity of a white child in a wealthy Savannah family headlined the newspapers, accompanied by photos of a grave-faced Grace, Elliot playing in the garden, and the Montgomerys' sumptuous home. Social media erupted with outrage, support, and judgment. For the powerful Montgomery family, this was a frontal attack on their carefully constructed reputation. They quickly launched a smear campaign targeting Grace. Unfounded rumors about her past, innuendos about her moral character, and targeted personal attacks. But Grace remained silent. She refused to reduce her fight to a war of words. She focused on what mattered: truth, justice, and above all, Elliot. The crowded courtroom became the scene of an intense confrontation. The Montgomerys' lawyers emphasized the private arrangements, the child protection, and the stability offered by the wealthy white family. They portrayed Grace as a mere employee, a woman bound by an unwritten contract with no real rights. But Grace's camp, supported by Darius, presented irrefutable evidence: the DNA test, Marcus's testimony from his cell, and above all, the countless letters of support. Former neighbors took the stand, recounting Grace's unwavering devotion to Elliot, her gentleness, her unconditional love. Former students of Grace, whom she had helped to rise in a difficult life, recounted how she had changed their destiny, given them confidence. Psychiatrists and child specialists explained to the court the exceptional bond that unites a mother and her child, beyond blood, trust, emotional security, attachment. And it was clear that this bond existed between Grace and Elliot, unique and profound. Then came the most upsetting moment. The little boy, who had already been through so many upheavals, was called to speak before the judge. With all the simplicity and sincerity of a child, he looked at the assembly and asked, "Why was I lied to? I want to live with my real mom." A solemn silence fell over the room. Eyes turned to Grace, then to Karen. This suspended moment was a victory for Grace, a victory for truth, for maternal love that is not measured by skin color or social rank. The sun streamed gently through the window of a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood of Decatur, just outside Savannah. The walls, recently painted in off-white, were dotted with children's drawings and small souvenir photos. Elliot's bright smile, Marcus's old hat, a picture of Grace in class. There was no flower-filled porch, no perfectly mowed lawn, no luxurious furniture. But every corner exuded the warmth of a rebuilt home. Grace was preparing breakfast, softly humming the gospel lullaby her grandmother had passed down to her. Elliot sat at the kitchen table, devouring his cereal, his eyes sparkling with excitement for another day of public school, full of discoveries and friends. Since the end of the trial, Grace's life had changed radically. She found a job teaching at a local school, surrounded by children just as she had always loved helping them. The pay wasn't high, but the joy she derived from the job restored her pride and dignity. Elliot, on the other hand, had found his place at this new school. He loved running around the playground, learning, and telling his family stories more truthfully than ever. Material wealth was gone, but a far more precious treasure had arrived: the freedom to be themselves, without lies or pretense. On the refrigerator, a small handwritten note from Elliot was pinned with a red heart-shaped magnet. He simply said, "Mom, you've always been there. Now I'm here for you too." Grace looked at this sentence, a discreet tear rolling down her cheek. She finally felt complete, at peace, carried by the sincere love of her son. She leaned down to kiss him, and in that simple gesture was at stake the promise of a future to be built together, on the solid foundations of truth and heart.